This is one of those moments where you hear a headline and your first reaction is, wait, did he really just say that? Because when a former US president openly talks about annexing Greenland, a NATO territory, and nobody laughs it off anymore, something has shifted. The tone is different, the reactions are different, and the urgency is very real. Let's start with what most people overlook. This isn't really about Greenland, not at its core. It's about what happens when threats that used to sound outrageous start sounding routine, and when world leaders realize that ignoring them might actually be the riskier option. Over the last stretch of days, Donald Trump has been everywhere in the global conversation again. Comments about Venezuela, rhetoric about leadership change, aggressive language that some supporters frame as strength and critics see as destabilizing. And then, almost casually, Greenland enters the picture. A place tied directly to Arctic security, NATO strategy, and international law. When Trump talked about it, it didn't land as a joke. It landed as a warning. Here's where things get interesting. While much of the media focused on whether Trump was serious or just being Trump, governments didn't have the luxury of debating tone. They had to respond to the implication. Because even if the odds of annexation are slim, the normalization of the threat itself changes everything. That's why Canada moved fast. Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip to Europe was supposed to be routine. Paris meetings, diplomatic check-ins, the kind of thing leaders do all the time without headlines. But from everything we've seen and heard, those meetings took on a very different weight once Trump's comments started circulating more widely among allies. In my view, this is the key moment most people miss.
Prime Minister, welcome to this little corner of Canada in Europe. We have a big relationship between Canada and Denmark. Amongst other things, we share a border, a maritime border of 3,000 kilometers, long trading relationship, diplomatic relationship, security relationship, obviously through NATO, through your presidency also of the Arctic Council, and our participation through the Nordic-Baltic Aid.
Canada didn't react publicly first. It coordinated privately. Carney didn't rush to microphones with dramatic language. He went straight to allies, especially in Europe, to make sure this wasn't treated as a one-off comment, but as part of a pattern that needed a collective response. And that's where Denmark comes in. When Carney appeared alongside Denmark's prime minister, the symbolism was impossible to miss. Greenland isn't an abstract issue for Canada. Canada and Greenland share the Arctic region. They share maritime concerns, they share NATO responsibilities, and they share a growing awareness that the Arctic is no longer a quiet backwater. It's becoming a strategic front line. What Carney said in that moment mattered less for its volume and more for its clarity. He made it explicit that Greenland's future belongs to Greenland and Denmark alone.
I just want to pick up on what Christian was talking with you about a moment ago on Greenland. The Danish Prime Minister has said that any type of military force used to annex Greenland would be the end of NATO. Do you concur with that assessment?
Well, let me reiterate what I said to Mr. Noel, which is that the future of Greenland is a decision for Greenland and for Denmark exclusively. It's their decision. Secondly, from a NATO context, the way I would frame it is that the western flank of NATO, which would include Greenland, the Arctic, is, given the evolving threat environment, is an area that we as NATO, Canada obviously importantly, given our geography, need to invest more in. This is a point that we've been making in recent years and since I became Prime Minister that we've really stressed. And with our build-up that's just beginning of our military capabilities, we are making heavy investments in the Arctic. We'll be working with our Nordic partners. We'll be working through NATO. This is one of the issues I'll be discussing with the Secretary General as part of an ongoing discussion with him around this to further advance it.
Stephen Miller, who is a senior advisor to President Trump, has refused to rule out military force in the annexation of Greenland. Does that trouble you?
Well, I didn't see the specific comments that Mr. Miller may have made. Look, I'll take a step back. We're partners in NATO. It is a mutual defense alliance. We can provide that security. And when we look at a couple basic, there's basic principles here. which is self-determination of nations, sovereignty, territorial integrity.
Not Washington, not the White House, not any outside power, no matter how influential. That wasn't poetic language. It was a line being drawn. Here's the part most people misunderstand. This wasn't Canada taking sides against the United States. It was Canada defending a principle that keeps alliances intact in the first place. Sovereignty is not negotiable, and self-determination isn't optional. A year ago, Trump wasn't talking about Greenland. He was talking about Canada itself, joking, or half-joking, about it being the 51st state. At the time, many brushed it off as bluster, but European leaders are now seeing what Canada saw earlier. Trump has a habit of testing boundaries to see which ones bend and which ones snap back. That's why Carney's tone in Europe wasn't casual. It was defensive, deliberate, and legalistic for a reason. When reporters asked him whether military force could ever be used to annex Greenland, his answer avoided emotional escalation and went straight to fundamentals. He anchored Canada's position in self-determination, territorial integrity, and international law, not because those words sound good, but because they're the guardrails that prevent chaos. From the reactions I've seen online, this moment landed differently depending on the audience. Supporters of Trump framed the conversation as strength and leverage. Critics saw it as reckless. But among policymakers and analysts, the concern was more specific. If a NATO country even entertains the idea of annexing another territory by force, the alliance itself starts to fracture. That's where Carney widened the frame. He didn't just talk about Denmark. He talked about NATO's western flank, Greenland, the Arctic, Northern Europe, Canada's own Arctic territory. He made it clear that this region is interconnected and that threats to one part of it ripple outward. And this is where the tension really comes from. The Arctic is warming. Shipping routes are opening. Resources are becoming accessible. And major powers are paying attention. Trump's language didn't create that reality, but it accelerated it. Standing beside NATO leadership, Carney reinforced another crucial message. Canada isn't freelancing. It isn't posturing alone. It's aligning itself tightly with collective security structures. That visual alone sent a signal to allies and adversaries alike. This isn't about one country reacting emotionally. It's about democracies reinforcing boundaries together. Now here's the twist that surprised a lot of people. When the conversation shifted to energy, Carney didn't play defense. He went on offense, calmly. Trump has often framed global energy politics as a zero-sum game. If one country gains, another must lose. If oil comes from Venezuela, someone else gets sidelined. But Carney flipped that logic. He acknowledged that a stable, democratic Venezuela would be a good thing. More oil production, more prosperity, less regional instability. And then he made a subtle but powerful point. None of that weakens Canada. Canadian energy, he argued, stands on its own. It's seen as low risk. It's produced under the rule of law. It's increasingly competitive on cost, and with investments in cleaner technology, it's positioned for the medium and long term. Here's why that matters. In times of global instability, reliability becomes a resource. As some regions grow more volatile, countries don't just look for oil, they look for trust. And Carney's message was that Canada doesn't need chaos elsewhere to justify its relevance. Canada's value rises precisely because it isn't chaotic. This wasn't bravado. It was confidence rooted in how global markets actually work. Stepping back, Carney's European meetings weren't about headlines or theatrics. They were about prevention, about making sure annexation talk doesn't become annexation reality, about reminding allies that responding individually makes everyone weaker, but responding together makes boundaries hold. Greenland is the test case. The Arctic is the pressure point. And Canada, having heard this kind of rhetoric aimed in its own direction before, isn't waiting to see how far it goes. Because once annexation threats become normalized, no country is too friendly, too close, or too secure to be affected. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing. I appreciate you.